Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that your day is going well. I hope that your week is progressing well. Here we are at the middle of another week, and we have the opportunity just to spend a few minutes together this afternoon. I want to begin today by looking at some things in the Gospel of John. I've been doing some reading and studying in the Gospel of John, more so than I have in a while, and just some interesting things that I'm finding there as I go back and restudy and reread and so forth. I'm looking at John chapter 10, and I invite you, if you have your Bible available now, to follow along with me in the reading. If not, and you want to look at this later, you can. But I'm looking at John chapter 10, and I'm reading beginning in verse 1. I want to read the first 5 verses. Verse 1 says, "Most assuredly I say to you," said Jesus speaking, by the way, "he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them. And the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." You know, John 10 is one of those chapters that introduces to us the analogy, the picture of Jesus as, he mentions 2 of them in the chapter. I am the door, and then he also says, I am the great shepherd. And when we think about those 2 things, it suggests the relationship that Jesus has with his sheep, that he is in one sense the means of entrance into the relationship. He's the door. But then once into a relationship, he doesn't stop his care and concern for his sheep. He is the shepherd of the sheep. So there's a beginning point, he's the door, and then there's a continuing relationship. And what's interesting to me is the fact that he mentions several aspects about his relationship with the sheep in his actions toward them. For example, I'm looking at John chapter 10, verses 3, 4, and 5 specifically. The sheep hear his voice, which means that he's speaking to the sheep. He's communicating to the sheep. If they hear his voice, that means he's communicating to them. He calls his own sheep by name. I've never really been involved with sheep, but I've been involved with other farm animals, horses, cows, pigs, goats. And what's interesting is to observe that farmers who deal with animals will oftentimes name each of those animals. At one point we had 15, 16 horses on our farm, and each one of those horses had a name, and they knew their name. Just like your family pet. You call that pet's name, they're going to know their name. Jesus calls his sheep by name, which suggests a personal relationship with each sheep. It's not just Jesus and the flock, it's Jesus and individual sheep. Notice they hear his voice, he calls them by name, he leads them out. He takes them from one place to another. He moves the sheep. In other words, he's moving them to provide what they need. But he's not driving sheep, because you don't drive sheep. You lead sheep. And it's interesting that verse 4 says that he brings them out and they follow him. He's providing the direction, the example, if you will, in which they should go. And they follow him. What's interesting about that is that as he moves from place to place, he's providing what they need. He's providing protection. And they've built such a trust and relationship with the shepherd that they follow him. And the reason it says they follow him is because they know his voice. Now, verse 3 says that they hear his voice. Verse 4 says that they know his voice. You know, it's possible to hear a voice, but not really know that voice. Jesus is teaching us here of his intimate relationship and his desire for that, so that when they hear his voice, they know his voice. They know it is him. It is a personal relationship. It is an intimate relationship. And because they know his voice, verse 5 says, they will flee from the voice of a stranger because they don't know his voice. There's a protective element in knowing the voice of Jesus so that we're not led into danger by a stranger. As I think about that and think about Jesus' relationship with his sheep, I certainly understand that you and I never will be, never are, never really want to be in the position of Jesus as the great shepherd. He's the only one in that position. But the Bible does teach that we are to be transformed to his image. We are to follow his example. And that makes me think about some things that maybe we can learn from Jesus in John chapter 10 as the great shepherd in his relationship with the sheep, so that we can have our relationship sheep to sheep. We learn from our relationship with him so that our relationship with one another gets better. Sheep communicate with sheep too. Animals communicate with animals. And oftentimes where one will go, others will follow. So there is the important point to make that sheep have a relationship with sheep. Christians have a relationship with Christians. In fact, Paul would say in Romans chapter 12 and verse 5 that individually we are members of one another, and because we are members of one another, 1 Corinthians 12:25 says that we should have the same care for one another. The sheep hear the shepherd's voice. Do we as sheep to sheep hear one another's voice? Are we communicating one with another? The sheep know his voice. Is that relationship close enough so that we know when a certain person speaks that we can trust and have confidence in that voice? The shepherd leads the sheep. Are we leading one another by example? Because animals will follow other animals. Sheep will follow other sheep, and Christians will follow other Christians, good example or bad. Which example are we providing? Do we know one another by name? Do we have such a relationship with one another that you know what's going on in my life and I know what's going on in your life, and we have that relationship with each member of our local flock? We often talk about a flock, but a flock is made of individual sheep. I want you to think about those relationships that Jesus has in John 10 as the shepherd, the great shepherd to the sheep, and how we might learn from that sheep to sheep. Which leads me really to where I want to be today. You notice I have a grin on my face, and that doesn't mean I'm up to anything mischievous. It just means that I've got something that I want to present to you for your consideration and even for your challenge, if you will. You remember a few years back on Facebook, the Ice Bucket Challenge, the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, where an individual would have some information about ALS. They would learn that. And as confirmation of that, they would take a bucket of ice, put water in it, and with multiple witnesses, they would dump the bucket of ice water over their head and everything and record that on social media. And that just spread like wildfire. Hundreds of millions of dollars was raised for ALS research. Well, I'm not going to encourage you to do an ice bucket challenge. But I am going to encourage you to do what I'm calling the Know My Sheep Challenge. And when I say know my sheep, I'm not talking about in the sense that we possess them. I'm talking about in the sense that we have a relationship one with another as sheep in a local flock. So here are some of the basic rules of the Know My Sheep Challenge. And by the way, if you benefit from this, You can subscribe to the channel if you wish. But more importantly, I want you to share the information so that other Christians might benefit, so that other people might benefit, and you can use these principles. Ladies and gentlemen, these are principles of contact and relationship building that are true and powerful in any area of life. I'm using them to improve and strengthen our sheep-to-sheep relationship. So, here are some of those basic rules. It takes 66 days to develop a habit so that it is automatic. Old research suggested for a long time, and it was the model we followed, that it was 21 days. Newer research says that for a habit, for a practice to become automatic so that we just do it and don't even think about it, it takes 66 days. So here is the 66-day Know My Sheep Challenge. For the next 66 days, I encourage you to use either a paper calendar or a digital calendar on your phone or on your desktop. For 66 days, set yourself a reminder to do these few things. In our membership and visitor directories, we have approximately 100 families. I counted that just a little bit ago just to make sure that that number was accurate. Over the next 66 days, here's what I want you to do. I want you to select 2 families. One family that you know well, one that you might not know as well, and here's what I'm encouraging you to do. I'm challenging you to do in a good way. I want you to send a note, make a phone call, send a text message, or send an email, first to a family that you know well so you're comfortable doing it, and then secondly, to maybe somebody you don't know as well, so that it's easier to do that second time. Make the first one easy with someone you know. The second one, maybe somebody you don't know as well, just reach out and just a basic touch. Maybe a touch that says, hey, was thinking about you today, saw this or heard that and it reminded me of you, just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking about you. Hope things are going well. If you don't know where to begin to build the common relationships, use the Ford method. No, I'm not talking about the automaker. Family, occupation, recreation, or dreams. That's used in business all the time as a means to develop a common basis for contact with people. Family, occupation, recreation, dreams. I want you to think about the fact that when we do that, we're not going to use social media. 66 days, 2 families a day, one known, one not as well known, a note, a phone call, a text message, or an email. And I want you to do that for this reason. And the reason is Titus chapter 3 and verse 14. Titus 3 is an interesting chapter in that Paul tells Titus 3 times to teach Christians to maintain good works. And that includes, ladies and gentlemen, our relationship one with another. In fact, verse 14 says, let our people learn to maintain good works so that urgent needs are met and so that no one becomes unfruitful. So I'm challenging you today, and you can challenge me and remind me as well. If I'm going to challenge it, I have to do it, right? That's only fair. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the directory, and you can begin today or you can begin tomorrow, maybe a little bit of planning, that's okay. I want you to pick a family in the congregation that you know well, one that you don't know well. I want you to send a note, make a phone call, send a text message, or send an email that you write. No social media. It's too easy to click that like button or to click that thumbs up. That's too easy. I'm talking about something where we invest some time and some interest. And over a 66-day period, everybody in the congregation is contacted, visitors are contacted, so that urgent needs are met. And ladies and gentlemen, we're in a time where urgent needs need to be met, and so that no one becomes unfruitful. One more comment, then we'll close. Somebody says, well, if I don't only do one a day, I failed. No, you haven't. You've done one, now the next day do two. In other words, if you don't get two, that's not necessarily failure. At least do one. We can all do that. I say this in a kind way and a little bit of a joking way. Zero's not an option. Do two, but if you can't do two, at least do one. The Know My Sheep Challenge. I hope that's helpful for all of us today. If you need a good place to study tonight, John 10, John 11 would be two good chapters. Learn more about Jesus as the great shepherd. See his work in raising Lazarus from the dead, an amazing chapter. I hope that your day is going well. I hope that your week is going well. I hope this helps us to know one another better as sheep so that urgent needs are met and so that no one becomes unfruitful. Titus chapter 3, verse 14. Thanks for listening today.